Hi there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about one of the big ones, the new album from Eric Church, titled The Outsiders. Now, here's a fun little observation about mainstream country music. Despite the dominance of male country acts, there aren't a lot of country music acts that focus on the darker side of country. You know the songs, the ones about kicking ass, drinking whiskey, playing hard, and raising hell. And while you get some acts who try to talk about these subjects briefly in mainstream radio, the majority of them aren't convincing in the slightest. Mostly because the instrumentation is so polished and clean and overproduced that none of the rough instrumental texture carries in to support the lyrics about crime, hard living, and the vast number of nastier topics that most country musicians won't think of touching. And for all of you who recognize this brand of country, it has a name. Yes, I'm talking about outlaw country, the genre that started in the late 60s and lasted for a few decades before fragmenting into smaller and smaller scenes within country music, the majority of which don't get mainstream airplay. And believe me, that pisses me off. Mostly because outlaw country is probably my favorite country subgenre, particularly because I've always liked grimy westerns, partially because I love murder ballads, partially because I love bourbon, and partially because there's a raw, potent authenticity to the music that just works for me. And what's so surprising, and ironic in a twisted sort of way, is that more bro country acts don't even come close to utilizing the outlaw formula. After all, it's a subgenre focused on being badasses, and I'm sure there are plenty of bro country artists who would be attracted to the uber masculine power fantasy of it all. And on that note, let's talk about Eric Church. Now, he's not a bro country artist. Hell, I'd have a hard time calling him a true country act rather than something closer to southern rock. But he definitely has his eyes fixed on outlaw country. It's a genre he really likes. A rarity for a successful country act in the mainstream. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen a country act try as hard as Eric Church does to be an outlaw. And what's all the more tragic is that he hasn't quite pulled it off. Maybe it's his voice not quite having the grit or texture on those first three albums. Maybe it's his instrumentation, which comes across as trying way too hard to sound rough and impressive and impactful, and ends up sounding startlingly inorganic. Or maybe it's just the fact that he's not a great songwriter in the tradition of Waylon Jennings, Chris Christopherson, or Merle Haggard. Either way, I don't know, guys. It's those first three albums, it didn't click for me. Now, don't get me wrong. Eric Church is by no means a bad artist, and I respect the hell out of him for trying and working as hard as he does across the board. You're not gonna find that many mainstream country acts who put this much effort into their instrumentation and sound and trying to make it sound unique, especially when doing so could mean a loss of mainstream success. I don't know, but maybe it's the clumsiness in the songwriting or the fact that Eric Church seems to be taking everything way too seriously. But every time I listened to his last album, Chief, which wasn't bad by any stretch, let me stress this, I was always struck by how little he was getting for all of that effort. The sadly ironic thing is that on the looser tracks where Eric Church wasn't trying as hard and seemed to be having a little bit of fun, the music actually turned out to be a fair bit better. Unfortunately, the early buzz surrounding Eric Church's newest album suggested that he wasn't about to start trying way too hard to be an outlaw. And now we have his newest album titled The Outsiders, a title so on the nose that I can't help but raise an eyebrow and make comparison to that S.E. Hinton novel that we all read in junior high. But as much as I'd like to make snide jokes and sarcastic commentary throughout this entire review, I will endeavor to try to take this as seriously as Eric Church plainly does on this record. Does he strike gold here? Oh boy. No. Oh god, no. We've got a special one in the house tonight, folks. In fact, because Eric Church's The Outsiders is a rare case indeed. The country album that tries way too hard and flames out in spectacular fashion. And it's across the board too, from production to instrumentation to lyrics to themes. But to see it coming from one of the biggest names in modern mainstream country music is something you haven't seen since, probably Chris Gaines. And for those of you familiar with that particular project of Garth Brooks are probably already gearing up for the worst, and you won't be disappointed there. First, let's talk about the elements that you'll notice from the very first track on this album, namely the instrumentation. Between the lead-in guitars, the bizarre tempo changes, the attempts to be technical that go absolutely nowhere, someone branded the song a cross between progressive metal of all things and country music. But speaking as a longtime fan of progressive rock and metal and of country, I couldn't imagine songs more stunningly misconceived in the attempts that Eric Church makes here. Sounds a bit like Tool crossed with country, or maybe Queensryche. Jeff Tate's new, absolutely terrible brand of Queensryche, with little to no technical proficiency on display, no driving crescendos, and everything coming together into a meandering, curdled mess. Most of this is a factor of bad guitar tonal choices. To be blunt, for an album trying so hard to come across as rough or edgy, the guitars are astoundingly weak and lumpy, a slurry of flat chord progressions that have absolutely no force whatsoever, to say nothing of actually being, catchy. Now, granted, this might be an issue with the production, which is incredibly sloppy for a major label release from a big name artist. I was actually shocked by how bad the production was here. Who thought the overload of reverb would sound good on Like a Wrecking Ball? Or the choice for none of the guitars on the slow ballads to have the slightest bit of texture or twang? Really, the production is closest to passable on the more modern country songs like Talladega and Give Me Back My Hometown, because, well, they at least try to reveal some flavor, and they seem to be playing within more of Eric Church's old country wheelhouse. But on the other hand, you have songs like The Joint, which have these lumpin' drum machines and turgid horns on a song that tries to make smoking weed sound transgressive and dark and completely fails because we already have Brandy Clark and Casey Musgraves, and weed stopped being legitimately dark and edgy years ago. Or take the song That's Damn Rock and Roll, a song that tries to cut back to 70s roots rock lyrics about survival, but does it with the brawny, processed, utterly flat guitars that you find in bad hair metal, with none of the technical skill behind it in the lyrics or in the instrumentation. And that's before you get to the offensive attempt at gothic country rock with Devil Devil. That tries to play the music equals succubus card with the Nick Cave-esque grandeur that only reveals a nasty undercurrent of misogyny, and a song that Eminem did better on 25 to Life off of Recovery. You know what? This is kind of twisted. An Eminem comparison is actually kind of apt in terms of musical maturity that both artists deliver on their albums, because both acts make music directed at angry white boys and angry white men who want to sound dark and edgy and yet have no idea what that really can be. And both men are playing with an idea of masculinity that's regressive and really quite juvenile when examined closely. But there's a marked difference, a marked distinction between Eminem and Eric Church, namely that Eminem is fully aware that he's spewing hateful nonsense and he wants people to hate him for it. His greater point about society at large is that so many people bought into the terrible rhetoric he spewed, and what does that say about us as a culture? But does Eric Church have anything to that degree of self-awareness in terms of his phony outlaw pursuits? Well, to be fair, to some degree, he actually does. A song, A Man Who Is Gonna Die Young, does focus on the fact that he's older, married, and has kids, and that doesn't exactly fit with the hard living associated with the outlaw image, and he does acknowledge a certain hollowness to that lifestyle. Of course, when that song is immediately after the title track, which is entirely focused on being an outlaw and an outsider, and then there's large chunks of this album that straightforwardly embrace the outlaw ideal with no satire whatsoever, with complete seriousness, I might add, it strikes that little bit of insight on that song as incredibly disingenuous. Because here's the sticking point, and why this album fails. There's no original subtext or nuance on this record, and that's because Eric Church just isn't a very good songwriter. His lyrics are steeped in cliches about being an outlaw, devoid of deeper context and weight, and it's all delivered with amateurish poetry that has no subtlety whatsoever. I'll say the same thing to Eric Church bragging about being an outlaw and an outsider, and that I say to rappers who have to constantly brag that they're real. If you have to keep telling me time and time again you don't show much about it, I'll start thinking that you're full of shit. Or take the song Dark Side, where he say he has to restrain his evil, cackling dark side, which lurks in the corner of his mind, but he'll let it come out to play if any thugs and angry mugs dealing drugs and making noise bother his family. But really, I don't buy that there's a real dark side to Eric Church at all. Or at least that hasn't been co-opted from real outlaws of the 70s or Nick Cave's junk drawer. And on that note, going back to Devil Devil, the song is a tonal mess from a songwriting standpoint, to the point where it's borderline parody as over the top and silly as it is. There's a reason why Charlie Daniels and Tenacious D framed their devil songs as comedic, or in the case of Nick Cave, went for pitch black material that's far more bleak, graphic, and genuinely menacing than anything Eric Church will be able to realistically pull off here. If anything, he tries to make it sound dark and edgy by using a lot of sexual terms and quoting a bunch of outlaws from the past, and really, that doesn't impress me much. But you know what? Even on a technical songwriting level, this album does not hold up. Take Broke Record, a song about a girl that borders on obsessive, but comes across filled with just sloppy writing and repeated words to fill up space within the verses. Cold One seemed to be filling the role of a bro country summer song, but even it doesn't rise to the good songs within that subgenre because it equates the heartache of a breakup with being one beer short of a 12-pack, and the sad fact is I don't think he was playing it like a joke. And then there's a Roller Coaster that strikes me as a poor man's version of Brad Paisley's Runaway Train from Wheelhouse, minus Brad Paisley's charm, wit, charisma, and great guitar work. But with the production and the instrumentation, it's pop country on a supposedly outlaw country album. So what is it even doing here? Look, I got the uneasy feeling that there was a lot of major label interference with the song selection on this record, where they just grabbed the best songs that they could and cobbled them together that was something that was vaguely country and might have a chance of selling, which leaves the album a tonal mishmash that doesn't flow well together at all. There's no narrative through line, there's no effective song sequencing that build up any sort of driving momentum and emotion, and the only element tying it all together is Eric Church's admirable but rather misplaced earnestness to approach a genre that I have to feel now that he barely understands. It's really telling that the best song in this album is probably Talladega, where he sings about the good moments that he had with his family, with spending time at NASCAR. And while I personally can't stand NASCAR, he manages to sell it and make it actually have some emotional weight that I bought into the song. It's a shame that all the rest of his outlaw tracks don't have that same emotional weight. Look, I'm not castigating Eric Church for experimenting. The experiment didn't work, but that's what happens when you try something new. Honestly, this experiment strikes me as stunningly misconceived and just poorly executed, constantly compromised and undercut at every single turn. Frankly, the album would have been, well, maybe not better, but at least more interesting if it was weirder and darker and it went further, actually pushed boundaries instead of name-dropping rock cliches and outlaw legends who just basically did everything Eric Church is trying to do a lot better. As it is, Eric Church's The Outsiders brings together his worst instincts to the forefront. A turgid slurry of bad guitar tonal choices, sloppy lyrics, haphazard production, and overwrought posturing that just comes across as so calculated and inorganic that it just completely falls flat for me. And once again, the real tragedy is that Eric Church is trying so damn hard to make this all work, and it's just not working at all. I'm sorry, Eric Church, this album's a 4 out of 10, and honestly, it's a good thing I respect the experimentation because this review probably reflects that the rating should be lower. No recommendation here, just one observation I want to make. It's very telling that Jason Eady recently put out Daylight and Dark, one of the best country albums so far this year, probably going to be one of the best albums of the year, that explored traditional outlaw themes and did it with restraint, nuance, and real intelligence. And it had way more of an impact on me than all of Eric Church's histrionics that he put us through on this record. Maybe he should just pick up Daylight and Dark. Who knows? He might actually learn something. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can imagine this review is going to make a lot of you very, very angry. But hey, I know progressive metal and I know country, and this is not a good fusion of either. Yeah, if there's anything else you'd like me to review, or if there's any other things I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'd be more than happy to take a listen. Until then, see you next time.